I'm really excited for the discussion today. It's not often that you get to spend a good amount of time getting into the detail of metrics and targets and taking it from a really interesting lens in terms of communication. So the methods in which we go about communicating this information and also the impacts that has on people, businesses, and other stakeholders. So we've got a good chunk of time. We've got 45 minutes to get really into the depths of this topic. And hopefully it's going to be a really interactive discussion, both with our panelists today and the audience here in the room and online. So my name is Charlie Dixon. I wear two hats. I'm an associate director in the nature team at the Green Finance Institute, and then I also head up market engagement in the UK for the TNFD. That's the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. If you're not aware of that, you don't need to understand all those words. Essentially, I spend an awful lot of time talking to businesses about how they should be reporting on nature, how they should be developing strategies around nature, and ultimately how that affects their financial bottom line. And I'm joined by some wonderful panelists today. So I have with me Joanne Thurlow, head of IT and data at Bristol Waste, Sara Kenny, communications manager at Biodiversify, and Elliot Coad, the co-founder of 30 by 30 UK. So our topic for today is all around metrics, and the key question at the heart of our conversation is going to be, are metrics and targets helpful or are they unhelpful when we come to communicating about nature and biodiversity? And we're going to have very different views of that from each of our panelists today. And just to kind of frame the conversation before we jump in, I want to kind of overlay this with just two broader trends that I've certainly seen over the past couple of years in my interactions, particularly with businesses, about how they're thinking about nature and biodiversity and metrics and targets. So the first one is around the perception of nature, and the value of nature. And I think a couple of years ago, a lot of the focus was around nature having a particularly innate value, or nature's role within the broader ecosystem, natural ecosystems, and regulating ecosystem services, but also its benefit to people and communities. And what we've seen a lot more over the past couple of years is trying to better understand and define how nature can provide benefits to businesses through things like natural flood management, through things like improvements in the supply of water or soil fertility. And so with that, become a bit of a shift in the way that we think about metrics and targets. So metrics related to how nature interacts with business rather than just the state of nature or how healthy nature is itself. Connected to that, I've also seen a difference in the way in which metrics are used. So with this, the audience that's interested in nature and biodiversity metrics has expanded. And so we're now also seeing a lot of businesses try and have this conversation at their C-suite and their board level, which means that we're now communicating this with a lot of people that aren't experts in nature and biodiversity. And so there's been a bit of a mix of data and metrics and targets with also storytelling and narrative to try and reach those wider audiences. And these are all topics that we're going to get into in much more detail within the discussion. So with that broad framing, I want to turn to each of our speakers and hear a little bit from them. And as I said, this is all intended as a conversation both between the panelists and you. So you'll hear from all of our speakers a bit of a provocation to try and get you thinking and involved in this debate. So we're going to be coming to you for questions after we hear from each of them. So I'm going to start with Elliot at the end, if that's okay. So in the context of 30 by 30, you're doing lots of thinking about targets and the impact of the metrics that we choose to measure progress against those targets. So can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective?
Absolutely. So for those that don't know, 30 by 30, this is amazing and arguably the most ambitious goal nature's ever had, which is to protect 30% of all land and sea for nature by the year 2030. 2 years ago-ish, almost 3 now really, almost 200 countries signed up and said, yes, this is a goal that we can see working. And then our natural propensity, I've got a few visuals, I don't know whether I can put those on while I'm chatting about this a little bit. Is it just literally, oh my gosh, fantastic. So the 30 by 30 goal, we've got Sir David there, talking about how amazing this is. This is really a beautiful moment for nature, but it's a goal, and we're used to goals. We know we fall quite short of them. Numbers are really important. I'm putting up on the screen here that we're off target, and this is actually the UK, and the kind of the dark fuchsia-y purples is kind of the areas that are counting towards 30 by 30 in the UK, and those lighter bits are kind of some of the lower hanging fruit, but still not there. But in reality, we're not at 8% on land. It's more like 3 to 6%. And so this immediately feels fatalistic. It's just like, well, why even get out of bed if we're at that level? How can we turn that around in 4 years? And this is one of the kind of problems. We might touch on this a little bit later about statistics. They feel like they tell you the entire story, whereas things can be really different. On the next, I've just got a few kind of map markers there of nature restoration projects that are springing up. And this is not even the large NGOs. None of those are counted. This is community projects, social enterprise, and all sorts of joint interest projects just springing up. And we're in the middle of this beautiful but intangible period where UK nature is having a moment. And that can actually be converted into a movement. And I think movements are really interesting because all the best movements and most successful ones have always kind of come out of nowhere, where we hadn't predicted that they were going to land at the time. Even as far back as Lenin, worker rights, and Martin Luther King, they both thought in their own lifetimes we couldn't make the change that they wanted to see. But we're in the lead indicators, if you will, not just the 3% well protected on land, but everything else that's happening around us is saying that we can seize this opportunity. Climate had this amazing moment in 2019 and 20. Lots of businesses and councils and everyone was, setting new targets. That's a real honeymoon period. But the political backdrop was Trump and Bolsonaro and, Trump's first term, Bolsonaro and Farage and Brexit and all sorts. And so, again, we're in another era where something really beautiful can come out of this. And so, on one hand, we've got a mountain to climb. On the other, things are happening, things are popping up. We only need £1 billion, £2 billion a year from the private sector to get them behind to kind of top up public funding, spending on the 30 by 30 goal. So that's my provocation, really, is this kind of joint love and hate affair with numbers. And I'll finish off. There's a third-party survey we had conducted where we asked across the whole of the UK, across all parts of society and little mini local geographies, little regions. We asked them. Some companies support net zero by 2050. Others support the goal of 30 by 30, and gave a little one-sentence explainer. And they overwhelmingly chose the goal of 30 by 30, even though they pretty much had never heard it before. So there's this kind of unusual, unexpected optimism that can come out of something. And so our organisation is just trying to help change the narrative just a little bit. We have everything we need amongst us, and some of those numbers are not very helpful. Anyway, I think that would probably serve as a bit of an introduction. Thanks for putting those up on the screen for me. And I'll pass this over to anyone else who wants to join in.
Great. Thanks, Elliot. It's super interesting, and great to hear that kind of thread that you were connecting between the metrics leading to the movement and then that broader narrative that sits underneath it. And so, Joanne, I want to come to you now. So building on some of the things that Elliot was thinking about and talking about, I think you've been thinking a little bit about the human response to some of these metrics, and especially what that looks like in a few different contexts. So, for example, what it looks like in teams, organizational change, digital transformation. So, yeah, please tell us a bit more about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for having me here as well. Sorry, excuse my throat. I think it's very important when we start with the metrics and that we set goals, as Elliot has spoken to. But the data that's behind that can be difficult to work towards those goals. So then is how do you get there? And this, talking about the movement side of it, that means that if you're going to have a movement, you need people. And you need to get people engaged on that data. And that data has to mean something and be something that they can connect to. And that's a very difficult thing, and I've seen it many times through many changes, not only related to this topic, but other topics, where you have the data, you have the targets, you have the goals, and people look at it and they go, I don't trust this, it's not transparent, it means nothing to me. I'm not sure if I want to really put myself over into all of this. So it's so important then to take that data and those metrics and make them meaningful. Bring the human element into it. You can have data, you can have targets, but the compliancy around achieving those targets does not necessarily mean commitment from people to getting the results that you genuinely want to get. So there's a process, and I think it's important to understand when we start to look at the data that's available and the reporting that is done, particularly in this area, a lot of my focus is in ESG and the different reporting standards from a business perspective. Now, that data in its own right can be very complex and difficult and challenging for people to get their heads around and understand. But when you look at biodiversity, that data is even less transparent and clear and solid in what's behind it. So I think it's okay in the case, particularly in the instance of biodiversity, to not have perfect data, to not say this is all the right stuff. It's incomplete because by nature itself, it's going to be incomplete and moving. Because if you have that type of transparency around the lack of quality data, or the missing data that might be there, then I think people will see it more genuine and get behind it. And it's interesting you said about the number of people who responded and said about biodiversity. And we talk about taking it to the human side, using the data and turning it into stories. Who amongst us is not going to connect with that beautiful water hitting the shore, or walking through a forest, or talking about animals? When we look at the stories that you can tell for biodiversity, I think there's a capacity there that is far more, that's going to resonate more with people because it is nature. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think we need to tap into it. So the challenge is really, how do you take that data where you go from reporting to responsiveness, from compliancy to commitment? How do you get people to get on board with the data in a meaningful way? And that has to come through the storytelling. And I think, Sara, that's probably a good part for you to speak to, is how do we tell those stories and make them the why that resonates for each one of us when we want to get behind all of this? And I've seen it in action. I just recently moved over from the Isle of Man, just a quick little story, and I don't know if you guys are aware, but the Isle of Man is the only UNESCO certified complete nation that has biodiversity status. So I've lived a lot of it when we talk about biodiversity, and I can see how passionate people can get about it, but it comes into the storytelling.
Great. Well, that's a perfect segue over to you, Sara. And you've been really kind of at the interface trying to help businesses grapple with that balance between making things storytelling, making things engaging, but also making sure that they're strategic. So how's that played out for you?
Yeah, I find that in my role, so I work for a conservation consultancy called Biodiversify, and we work with big businesses to help them mitigate their nature impacts. And I find that when it comes to storytelling in a setting where you are working with complex data, it is really an act of translation. I find that with marketing, and this is in a broad scale, not just in the conservation space, that there's been a bit of a complication when it comes to storytelling, and I think that came from a time where there was maybe some issues with marketing, and one very clever marketer came across marketing as a concept, storytelling as a concept. And when we were faced with marketing issues, this person thought, well, we have storytelling. And people were like, yeah, storytelling, we like that. We like stories. We've grown up with them. We resonate with them. They make us emotionally feel things. And everyone knew that that was impressive. But I think that that led to then more marketers being like, yeah, storytelling's the answer to all of our problems. We need stories. To then this situation where, as a group of marketers, we kind of went into a space of all being like, yeah, we tell stories. But do we? And I've been questioning myself on this because I think that we've done this thing where we think we're telling stories, we think we're creating content that is what our audience should be hearing when really it's what we want to tell them. And we've kind of tricked ourselves. And I think that with storytelling, to do it properly, we need to be honest about what it actually is and bring it back to those basic things. So for most of us here, when we first came across storytelling, we were maybe children. We were being told very simple stories that made us feel things. They taught us things about the world, the way it worked, how to move about it. And I think as storytellers now in a corporate space, we need to challenge ourselves to move back to simplicity. And that's a trade-off. There is this need for businesses and for science to do things in a way that's technically accurate. You don't want to remove so much of the data that then the messages that you are trying to give are inaccurate. But there's also then this element that if you want something to be engaging, if you want people to be able to take it and remember it, it needs to be simplistic. But that trade-off is that you don't want it to be simplistic to the point where it's then not actually accurate and not helpful. So I think as, sustainability communicators, that's something that we need to work out where the line is together. I'd love to be able to sit here and be like, I know where the line is, this is it, it's all fine. But we need to, I guess, come together and make sense of this as a group. And I think that that's something that I've seen play out in Biodiversify. So I do the communications and marketing, but I am working with people who love data. They love data as much as I love storytelling. And sometimes meeting in the middle takes a lot of communication. Unfortunately, as a fully remote company at the start, we're good at that. We were always very mindful to embed communication internally, especially in a digital setting, into the way we did things. So when it comes to having complicated conversations such as, does the audience we're trying to communicate really need all that data? We can have that back and forth, and we usually meet in the middle and produce something much better than what either one of us would have did alone. And I think that is where, if we want to use metrics and data and anything that can be complex to tell effective stories, it really does take a village.
There we go. Very interesting. I'm wondering, just before we open it up to the wider audience, how does that sit with you, Joanne and Elliot? So that kind of interplay between how do we make sure that we get the balance right between making sure we've got scientific, robust data that's targeted and it's specific and it's clear versus having a simple story that people can get behind and that can inspire. What does that look like from your contexts?
Do you want to go first, Elliot?
Do you? Well, well, maybe I will start then. Yeah, I was wondering if demurring. It's just complicated, and the opposite, the way that everything always works is we are simple creatures and also time poor, and so the real intelligent approach is how do we condense all that complexity and provide it in something that's kind of fairly piecemeal. The amount of time we waste just hearing things, and it just turns into noise because, it doesn't really ground or speak to me in particular. Like, how does this relate to me? Or, which emotion do I want to evoke from me to be able to kind of connect to that story? So I would only say that storytelling has been the only way that we've been able to make inroads, and that kind of campaign was successful when someone tells me they remember it from 2 years later, and it's quite a sweet story involving someone really lovely, and it's very it's very creative and grounded, versus all the other kind of campaigns that I know we've done. And we tried a lot of things, but I think they're kind of speaking to a human at its very kind of innermost, where we're kind of driven by these emotions, have been the most memorable, the most kind of powerful. But how do we present that in a way that's going to be really, that we can kind of rely on that in the future, and not just be, like a Waitrose Christmas ad where it's like a little sickly, trying to be very authentic and, being able to bring you eyeball to eyeball with the cause that we're trying to genuinely turn around. So a lot of mixed emotions actually on that one. It's a bit triggering actually. But I'll pass over to you, Joanne.
Okay, well, there's a lot there that could respond to. The data side of it. I deal with data every day. And with Bristol Waste, obviously, there's a lot to do with sustainability that gets packed into that. So I struggle with this every day. How are we getting data? Is it quality data? And how do we get the business or the Bristol public engaged based on the data that we have? And it is a constant battle. Excuse me. And I do think in today's world, you really touched on it, Elliot, it's about getting that emotional resonance somehow. This somehow has to hit your limbic system in your brain that says, I can connect to this at a very emotional level and base level. And that's a challenge, particularly when you look at how overloaded we all are with media and things trying to get our attention. So for people like yourself, Sarah, who are trying to cut through all that noise, I have nothing but respect, because I think it's a very challenging job these days, probably more so than it has been in the past in getting there. The quality of data, the data that comes in, the quality of data and getting it clean and knowing what to report on. You also have to take into consideration that different people are going to connect in different ways. So for some people, it would be very visual. If we do this, this is how many pictures of how many automobiles that are not going to be on the road. That's something I can maybe relate to in some way, shape, or form. Or, what it means for the nature around me and that impact. If you see the pictures of the, what is it, they call it the plastic ocean out there, and you look at that and you think that resonates with people. So it could be the visual side of it. It could be what you're hearing. It is very, very challenging to try to get your message across and cut through all of that. And that's where I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, the fact that that data is not going to be 100%, own that, make that part of the story. Say, it's not perfect, but we're working towards making it perfect. And you can help us get there, but let's go with what we have, because we have to be doing something. So yeah, it's an ongoing struggle. I could talk wax lyrically about data when you say that some people go down into it. I have a data team. I really, really resonate with that one. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. What I find really striking about this is it's two quite different contexts, right, that we were just talking about there. So Elliot, you were thinking from a kind of campaign and engaging the public and consumer perspective, and Joanne, you're thinking from kind of internal organizational change. How do we get the message across to individuals within a business? And you've both landed on appealing to emotions. It's both making sure that that data tells a story and you understand kind of what the viewer or the recipient values, and so what's going to make them tick. Fascinating.
I think with storytelling, it always comes back to the one word, why? Why does this matter? And a good exercise, if you're trying to get to the why, is 7 questions. So you ask yourself why, and you come up with an answer. And then you go, why, to that answer, and to the next one, and to the next one. And as you peel through those layers of asking why, you'll probably find the very emotional why at the core of all of that. And that might be a way for you to get down to what that message actually is. It's a very helpful exercise.
Great. Well, at that point, let's open this up to join the conversation with everybody in the room and online. We've got about 20 minutes or so, so we can get really into the depths of this. So hopefully there should be a mic roving around. So yeah, please do let us know if you have any questions for any of the panelists.
Shall I start with a couple from online,
Yes,
Charlie? And then I
please.
can run around with the mic. So I'll read a couple. So one was, any examples of nature impact stories? And keen to hear about how data played a role in those. And second, about your views on how nature conservation charities can play a role in this and supporting business in particular.
Anyone feeling inspired?
The one that comes to my mind was just to kind of continue with, I'm going to loop data into this. I'll keep it short because it's not necessarily data, but it's about how something can really come out of nowhere that can do all the heavy lifting for you when it comes to connecting with an idea or a problem. This is indelibly in my mind. It's not just we went to go visit some of our trees we planted in Kenya. I'm not just talking about it because we're really proud of it, but we spent about a week really going to the nursery, seeing how everything is, all the kind of the nuts and seeds are collected, and meticulously all these little tiny seedlings are just watered twice a day, and it's just an extraordinary amount of work. But really, for me and the rest of the team, what we really came away from that was, there was one planter that came up to me and said, I just wanted to say thank you for putting food on my family's tables at night. This means something extraordinary to me. And he was saying that his granddad had, for the first time, seen a dried up riverbed start to trickle because there's now more vegetation on the side of this mountain. And we were there with a few of our biggest clients, and they just keep on coming back to me saying, like, remember that planter that came up to us? And just all of a sudden, you know, we were talking about carbon and tons offset of our emissions and our, you know, our CDP, you know, the disclosure project for carbon. You know, we exist within this world. And then we came out and we saw real impact being felt by just so much more than those numbers really, you know, came alive and then went so much further. It's just the most extraordinary interaction that I'll always remember. You know, again, it's that kind of like, how do we inject the humanity into what we do? But I mustn't just sound like just a total data phode whatsoever. I'm not that at all. I'm a nerd. My background is tech, and numbers can cut through like that. You know, the third-party research that we did about, you know, 30 by 30. No one had ever heard of it. You know, but yet they kind of went for it. And so, you know, we clutch onto those things whenever we can, and then you use that kind of innate passion and just fire it off into anyone who wants to hear it and feel like they're the right sort of people to listen to it. You know, just like the interaction with that tree planter, you know, it's indelibly set now in their minds, and, you know, a real turning point for so many of us. Yeah, not sure if why that popped into my head just then, but that's my real kind of connection there.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And maybe, Sara, there's something from you. So do you have any examples from any of your clients where you've seen like data really affect change within the way they've kind of gone about different aspects of their operations?
Well, I think where data's been really useful is getting internal buy-in. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our clients are at a point where they have nature teams within the businesses. They're often just as passionate about nature as our team are, and that creates a lovely kind of situation from us, because our team are working with people who are just as caring as they are, and it means that the work can be very fruitful in that respect. But getting internal buy-in for the C-suite can be sometimes tricky because they have to manage the needs of the entire business, and they're often having lots of passionate people coming to them saying, you know, we want you to give us funding for our project, and others are saying, well, no, actually, we want you to give us funding from our project. And where I think data has been really helpful is it's allowed people in nature roles to be able to go to the C-suite and say, look, this is the numbers that back up what we're saying. We can make a different impact here, and we can make positive change for the business. And that really is something that will set up strategies for the next couple of years. You know, once you have that funding, it is just a bit of a momentum. What we found with our clients is some of them want some support with us for a short term, but the majority of them do want to work with us long term. So, for example, we've been working with Primark on their cotton programme for the last 5 years, and that was a piece of work that actually started off quite small, but as we worked with them, it became a bigger priority for the business, just like it has been for all businesses. I think I'm not sure who was mentioned earlier, but in 2019, there was this big change, and nature did become, I think, a much higher priority for business. It's what we're seeing in Biodiversify. We had this point where, when we looked at the data, the amount of requests for proposals that we were getting were just doubling year on year. It is becoming a much bigger thing for business, and it's really nice to be able to see data support those internal decisions, so then the people that want to work on this can be empowered by the people leading those businesses.
Great, really good to hear. And I might just add one from my perspective as well, actually. So I do quite a lot of work with water utilities, and so one of the things that we're seeing more and more from water utilities all across the UK is replacing water treatment facilities with wetland treatment facilities. And lots of water utilities want to do this. They know it's good for nature. They know it's good for the local community, has great co-benefits, but it's challenging to do that when they don't have the evidence. And so one of the water utilities, actually not too far from here in a region just neighbouring, has put some effort into trying to quantify this. And they've kind of come to the conclusion with one of their big sites that for every £1 they've invested at a wetland treatment facility, they're saving £10 to £20 on what they would have done if they did it the kind of classic traditional grey infrastructure treatment facility way. So it's that kind of data, just one small data point can really kind of reinforce the story and get that business case across. Let's open up. Let's take some more questions. Anyone in the room? Another one from, oh, we've got someone here in the white t-shirt.
Great, and we've got a couple more online as well after.
Thanks. I think that generally things like net zero or carbon neutral or carbon footprint even fairly well understood or generally understood in the public with consumers, and businesses are able to put targets out there and say we want to be net zero by 2050 or this production line is carbon neutral or whatever it is, but there isn't really a well understood biodiversity metric or target. I know that TNFD obviously is trying to get there, but what do you think businesses can use as a sort of nature data point or nature target that can engage audiences, either like stakeholders or consumer level?
Great, thanks. Savita, do you want to take one or two from online as well? We'll take a bunch.
Yeah, great. It was a question for Sara about kind of practical visually showing this data. Kind of what are we talking, graphs, bar charts? How can we do this in a compelling way?
All of them. I think that when it comes to storytelling and when it comes to data communication in particular, we need to be really specific about the audiences that we are looking to communicate with. And I think that we have so much broader access to tools like Canva and video editing, and we can be really creative with the way we make visuals. So we should really lean into that. I think that whether it's a graph or a chart, I think that we should just be creative, but also be willing to work with people who are, graphic designers and people who are illustrators. It's something that I think Biodiversify have always been quite forward thinking on from before I even joined the team. When I joined the team, they had a Wix website, and I remember doing my interview and thinking, oh, we're going to need to start off with a new website. Little did I know they had a whole brand suite and illustrations and beautiful visuals that I was just going to get to inherit, that had all been worked on from before I joined. But we've used that to really weave some fun into our communications and our visuals. So anytime that we are doing stuff that is maybe a little bit heavier visually, we're just making sure that we're using things like colour theory and illustration and just borrowing from those creative spaces and engaging with them to make our visuals the best they can be. So I think when it comes to visual storytelling, collaborate with people that are in those creative spaces, and where that really comes into its own is when you can work with people who are able to speak both languages. I've found that there has been a real increase in the amount of people that are not only graphic designers, but graphic designers specialising in science communication. And I'm really, really excited to see that, because I think that it's going to really uplift the whole industry and really make storytelling much more effective. So yeah, when it comes to visualisation, I say try it and see.
I could add something to that, because I have to agree with you. Bristol Waste. What do? We do waste collection, we do facilities management, we do recycling, all of those things that are very key for the city of Bristol in regards to sustainability. Talking about some of the reporting and how does that measure out, like that 1 pound equals 10 pounds here. That's something that's often referred to, or you may know it as social value reporting. And if you're not familiar with social value reporting right now, you should make yourselves aware of it, because it is definitely up and coming to help do just that. How do you illustrate what I'm doing in my business, my organization, and getting things back within the community or having that impact overall? So that's really important, and that's something that Bristol Waste is challenged with every day. If you look at some of the materials that we put out subsequently at the end of the year to say this is how we've been doing, it's all bright colors, lots of graphics, good storytelling, so that it appeals and be easily interpreted by many of the citizens of Bristol. Bristolians, I think is the word, Bristolians. Thank you, sorry. So for Bristolians to be able to look at that and understand and interpret that quite quickly, regardless of what their backgrounds are, that they can readily see that. So it does go into that whole graphical representation of the data, which is us telling the social value story. Caveat here, when we talk about the data with this type of storytelling, is you have to be able to back that data up, because as an organization, if you can't verify your data and you say this is what you're doing, you then run the reputational risk of being accused of greenwashing. So there's the other side. When you're looking at your storytelling and you're putting those statistics out there, whatever way you're representing, it is really important that you're able to validate and verify the data behind it, because your stakeholders, your investors, anyone that you're engaged with, they may well come to your door and knock on it and say, prove to me that that is what you're succeeding. So just a little word of just awareness for while you're working on these areas.
Great. And then on that first question as well that we had, which was, how do we grapple with all of the metrics? There's so many different options out there for nature and biodiversity. Should we be trying to consolidate that? Should we not? If so, how? Anyone have any reflections on that?
This is a big topic as well, because when you get into trying to validate it, you're often talking about carbon credits and the carbon market in terms of validating it. And quite often with biodiversity, they refer to them as blue credits. And again, there's no standard, and there's no global standard where you can say definitively that equals this. And I do think, even from an ESG and sustainability reporting, they're grappling to get those standards widely accepted globally. And I think the biodiversity side is behind that wave, but it will be the next wave. I'm not aware of any specific globally accepted standard for measuring it, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I know that there is definitely a desire for it.
Mm-hmm. Elliot, did you want to come in?
Oh, yeah. Maybe I don't know, Ms. Sarah, be able to kind of help with some of the biodiversity credit state units and measurement. From my point of view, it feels like it just shouldn't be a blocker, because we haven't fully mapped the beautiful intricacies of nature. Shouldn't be a blocker to businesses wanting to reduce their impact and starting to go from damaging to more restoring. So that's important. So it shouldn't be just this kind of perfectionist kind of like, we're not ready yet sort of thing. I think it's really important. And also timing, another little mini thought, carbon credits, we don't want to go there again where we've got the idea of just offsetting, because offsetting got us nowhere with neutrality. It should just be about, measuring and then contributing. How much can you contribute back into the planet? But I think where metrics becomes really helpful is where you can quantify something and relate it to the business in terms of, as you were saying, Charlie, almost like an ROI. Mm-hmm. So in my old company, Ecology, with an I on the end, sorry, borrowed the word of the science ecology there. It's easier when it's written down. We used to talk to American businesses and get American businesses signed up and, funding nature-based solutions. But they would say, like, where's our ROI? And we'd always kind of maybe like stifle a little mini laugh. It's just like, but aren't we going to do it for just because we should? But in 2025, I think a lot of businesses in the UK are thinking exactly how I was speaking to businesses in the US about it. You have to have the ROI nailed down. And this is where metrics need to work about as hard as it could possibly inject as much as you can, because if a business is going to voluntarily get behind something, they need to say to their CFO, we've seen some really good numbers and we really believe in them, and then you're unlocked, like your £1 invested in nature-based solution for wetland water filtration and getting £10-20 back. That's incredible. We work really closely with a resiliency modelling company called Rebalance Earth. And overall, it's about £1 in £5 is an ROI on lots of different sectors where, flood alleviation, and drought, of course, and soil improvement and all sorts of things. Nature is a very low cost, but difficult to quantify solution, and that's the uncomfortable truth. In theory, it's there, but you've got to have a longer mindset, longer view on making it come home to roost. So a couple of little mini ideas around that. Have you come across, which of the units are starting to emerge? Charlie, TNFD really well. Is units in your area, or is it mostly just sort of pure in, which numbers need to do the hardest work to kind of communicate what your clients are after?
I think from what I've seen, it's been a bit of a combination. So with businesses, there's a lot of things that are similar across lots of businesses between industries, but we are always faced with that challenge of the fact that it is near impossible to measure nature. Biodiversity isn't like carbon, it doesn't have a universal metric, so that is always a challenge. So what my team tend to do is they work with, I guess, a range of metrics, and they borrow from certain things and they make things very specific to the business, like you were saying before. And it's one of those ones where, and similar to like picking up on what Joanne said, with this data, it's not perfect and we can't aim for perfect. And a lot of businesses, when they come to Biodiversify, are thinking, oh, our data's too messy, we don't have enough, we're not ready. But that can't be seen as a blocker, because I think that gold standard of that readiness that people might be waiting for just isn't there, and sometimes good enough is actually good enough.
And a very quick interlude from the TNFD perspective is we shouldn't allow the kind of quest for a single unit to almost confuse what the really important data or information underlying that is. So TNFD is very much about understanding what are the specific impacts a company has on nature, what is the specific dependencies a company has on nature. Pick your top 1, 2, or 3 that are most important and focus on those, rather than trying to combine everything together. Let's go for some more questions.
We've just looked up what ROI is, because we didn't know, return on investment. And it's prompted me to wonder whether companies are needing that sort of investment return in order to get involved with nature recovery, and whether I'm interested in this idea of the difference between nature as a human resource, or humans being a part of nature, and nature having a right to exist in its own right, you know, with humans within this whole ecosystem, and whether the idea that, you know, businesses need to have a financial incentive to protect and secure nature, when actually, surely, we should all just be investing and protecting and regenerating for nature's sake, not just for a return on investment.
We're getting to the juicy questions now. Anyone want to jump in?
I'll jump in with something in regards to that. So we're seeing trends where a lot of companies are starting to look at, and you'll see companies that are like sustainably focused companies. And they tend to be younger, much like yourselves, with all of you, with what you're doing, and you're making that a core part of it. But then you have the bigger companies, the more traditional companies, the multinational companies that have to do something because their investors are expecting it, but they are absolutely driven by that bottom line and the reporting. And in those instances where it's focused on ROI, what we're encountering and what we're seeing, and I say we, this is through my other hat of the ESG Institute, not Bristol Waste as such, what we're seeing is that the push is coming from the bottom up. It's coming from the employees. It is coming from the investors, saying, no, it has to be more than just a financial exercise for us. But that is a big gap to close. And when you look at many of the SMEs across the globe, you're seeing more and more of them are getting on board with being sustainable and nature sensitive for the sake of just that. So I think it's an interesting trend. It's an organic growth being driven out, because, to be fair, reporting on sustainability and what you're doing is not going to be optional. It will be a part of your business and organizational DNA, regardless, just as your finance and your HR is today. That is where it's going. It will be there. It's something you don't do once and you're done type of thing. So that mindset is happening. And like I said, in my other side of my life, with the Institute, I'm dealing with a lot and speaking to a lot of companies globally about where they're at and what they're getting involved with. So these are the trends that I would say are picking up, and that very much impacts the UK as well, without a doubt. So I think it's going in the right direction. But it's people like yourselves who have those conversations, people like yourselves who are out there waving the flag, that are just going to help get it there faster and have more impact. So keep talking about it.
Great. We're coming to the end of the session, so we will need to wrap up now. But any final thoughts from either you, Sarah or Elliot?
I love the question. Why aren't businesses paying? Why don't they have to pay if they pollute and all sorts? So we should never stop being outraged about the position they're in. I keep on thinking about it, there's still no limitation or polluter pay model for almost all businesses. Fortunately, in the UK, we've got this biodiversity net gain thing, bringing it back to nature. There's good and bad with that, but at least we're kind of broaching the idea that maybe you can't just clear swathes of nature and not expect a for-profit business to pick up the bill on it. It's madness. And so, yeah, keep on questioning why we're in this position, because those sorts, ultimately regulation and more of a stick than a carrot. I mean, it's just got to be balanced out at some point.
Yeah, I agree. It was a really fantastic question, and it would be ideal if we were in a situation where businesses didn't need that ROI to actually make that spend. But from what we're seeing, businesses really are waking up to the importance of investing in nature, and I think that if using things like ROI is how we get them to get comfortable with making those big spends, it's useful in that respect. Hopefully we will get to a situation where that's no longer needed and they just universally understand the importance. But I think the fact that, consultancies like Biodiversify are starting to see more engagement from business for looking for services in this space, and the fact that a lot of the startups now are nature startups. There's so much talent and business in the nature space in the UK. That's being driven by a want for it. So I think that in itself is a real indicator of hope, and I hope that continues. It will get to a stage where someday this is just a given. It's just seen as something that is business essential. Great. I think it's also a question of scale. So there will be businesses that do things off their own back. There will be kind of CSR budgets, but that's only going to get so far. And the scale of the problem that we face in terms of what needs to change in order to both reduce impacts on nature and fund nature restoration is quite daunting. And so to get money moving on that scale, the ROI helps an awful lot when you can speak their language. So I think that brings us to the end. Is that the end? Yes. Okay. So all that remains is to say thank you to our wonderful panelists who provided fantastic and quite different perspectives. And if you would like to continue the conversation, please do come up and ask them some more questions. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.